Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're going to get started in just a few minutes to allow others to join. Thanks for being here, and just hang tight for a second. Thanks. Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're just going to give it about maybe 2 more minutes before we get started. Thanks for being here. So hang tight. Okay, welcome, everyone. Thanks for hanging tight for a moment. Welcome to what student loan borrowers need to know right now. My name is Amy Salata. I'm the Outreach and Advocacy Manager at the Student Borrower Protection Center. We're a national nonprofit policy organization focused solely on alleviating the burden of student debt in the country. And we do this through a mixture of advocacy, policymaking, and litigation strategy to rein in industry abuses, protect borrowers' rights, and advance economic opportunity for the next generation of students. I am very excited to be here with you today. Thank you for joining us. I'm joined by my colleague, Kat Welbeck, who will be helping with questions at the end. If you have questions during the presentation, please put them in the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. That way we'll be able to collect as many as possible and sort them by theme and then answer as many as possible at the end of the presentation. And I guess just a note, we can't give legal advice. So if your question is hyper specific or, pertaining to your individual situation, we might not be able to answer that, but we find that most questions can be answered with general program information. Okay, so let's get started. We are going to talk about a lot of things today. So here's what we'll cover. So we'll talk about what to think about in terms of return to repayment, talk about IDR plans or income-driven repayment, and then something called the IDR account adjustment that's happening right now. We'll review public service loan forgiveness, the program generally, and then how it interacts with the IDR account adjustment happening now. We'll also talk about what to do if you are in default, which is an initiative called Fresh Start. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about the Supreme Court decision that happened this summer and what to look forward to this fall, and then review important takeaways, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions. So let's get started. So first, I'm sure this is top of mind for folks. I know it's a very stressful time in people's lives, but we'll talk a little bit about return to repayment and how to prepare for that now that it's happening right now. So as I'm sure you know, the payment pause ended on August 30th of this year. Interest started accruing in September, and payments are due in October. So they're due right now for folks. That date is different for everyone. It depends, on you individually. And so we'll run through how to figure out when your payment is due. It's a good practice to update your contact information, especially since so many people moved during the past 3.5 years during the payment pause. So you can make sure your contact information is up to date with your servicer and with studentaid.gov. Income-driven repayment plans, which we'll talk about in a little bit, they need to be recertified every year. Typically, you need to, submit documentation of your income so that they can recalculate what your monthly payment will be. Those have been extended until March 2024. And so if you were on an income-driven repayment plan before the pandemic, you don't need to recertify your income until March of 2024. And they're still continuing to do verbal. It's still possible to do it over the phone if you're trying to recertify. But just remember to continue to recertify on these income-driven repayment plans, because otherwise you'll be put into the standard plan automatically, and it might be really unaffordable for you. And then finally, automatic payments. If you had auto-debited payments set up before the pandemic, those should not be restarting automatically. The Department of Education has said that they are not going to start those automatically. So you have to proactively choose to enroll in them. I also mentioned this because we've been getting some stories from borrowers that this has been happening to some folks. So, you might want to check your bank account, make sure that's not happening to you, because it shouldn't be happening. And if you want to enroll in auto-debited payments, of course, contact your servicer to get on those auto-debited payments. Okay. Well, the first step for everyone really to figure out, who your servicer is, when your bill is due, is to log into studentaid.gov. This is the Department of Education's borrower-facing website. And if you don't remember your login information, you can reset your password so that you can log in. It's right here in the right-hand corner at the top. And so that's going to be your clearinghouse for really any information regarding your student loans. Once you're there, you could figure out a few things. You could figure out who your servicer is, what type of loans you have, find out if you're in default if you weren't sure about that. And then you can update your contact information here. So this is what the screen looks like when you log in. On the right-hand side, it'll say your servicer. So this person's servicer here is Mohila, and their due date is September 30th of 2023. And then immediately below that, you can see who their servicer is and the website for that servicer. So you can go directly from studentaid.gov to your servicer's website and make sure that all of your information is correct on your servicer's website. Here you can find out when your next payment is due. You should have received a bill 21 days before your first payment is due. And so you could check that in your messages or your inbox to see if you received that bill. Okay. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about income-driven repayment and how this functions. So income-driven repayment, or IDR, is the acronym. This is the payment plan in the bottom right-hand corner here. When you graduate, or after when you start repaying your student loans, you're automatically placed onto something called the standard plan. That's this top left-hand corner. It has you paying off the entire amount of your loan in 10 years. And so those payments could be pretty high for folks, especially if your balance is really high. There's also the extended repayment plan that has you, paying off the balance of the loan over a longer period of time. A graduated repayment plan, which has you kind of starting at low payments and then moving towards larger payments throughout the course of the loan. And then finally, we're talking right now about income-driven repayment plans, which are pegged to your income. And so they're often more affordable options for folks. And so they're not pegged to the entire balance of the loan, which could be quite unaffordable. So under income-driven repayment plan, you have a right to have your remaining balance your remaining balance canceled after 20 or 25 years in repayment. And if you're seeking something like public service loan forgiveness, that timeline is shortened to 10 years while on an IDR plan and seeking PSLF. And there are 4 types of plans that fall under income-driven repayment. The first is income contingent repayment, or ICR, income-based repayment, or IBR, pay-as-you-earn, which is PAYE, or revised pay-as-you-earn, which is REPAYE down here at the bottom. So these are the 4 plans that are currently considered income-driven repayment plans. The last of these plans, Revised Pay-As-You-Earn, is being phased out and replaced by the SAVE plan, which we'll talk about in just a moment. But generally, you know, income-driven repayment is a more affordable option for most folks, and it has folks getting cancellation after 20 or 25 years in repayment. If you're interested in income-driven repayment plans, you can go to studentaid.gov/IDR and sign up there. You can look at what your repayment would be under different plans. If you look at the loan simulator tool at studentaid.gov, you could also call your servicer to get on an income-driven repayment plan if that's of interest to you. Now, in August of 2022, President Biden announced a new income-driven repayment plan called the SAVE plan, or Saving on a Valuable Education Plan. This, as I mentioned, is replacing the repay plan. But what it does is it provides even more affordable payments than the other IDR plans for most people, because it protects more of your income. It also eliminates the interest for your loans after your payment. And then it excludes spousal income for any student loan borrowers who file their taxes separately. These are the 3 things that are already implemented on the SAVE plan. So this is being rolled out gradually. Some of it was implemented this summer. These 3 things in particular were implemented this summer. And then next July, we'll have another swath of things that are being implemented, which I'll get to in a second. But on the Federal Student Aid website, if you look up SAVE, it has like an estimated monthly payment plan under the SAVE plan. And you can see here that there's your income on the left and your family size on the bottom. But what we notice is that there's a lot of zeros on this page. And so for many folks, it'll be much more affordable. And some people might even be eligible for a $0 monthly payment under this plan, and more people will be able to get a $0 monthly payment than some of those other plans that I mentioned. And so, again, you can use the loan simulator tool or contact your servicer to figure out what your monthly payment might be on the SAVE plan. Okay, and then next summer, these are the things that'll be implemented on the income-driven repayment plan SAVE. So it'll cut people's discretionary income in half. So for undergraduate loans, if you'll only have to pay 5% of your discretionary income instead of 10%. And then for people with a mixture of undergraduate and graduate loans, you'll pay a weighted average between 5 and 10%. So again, protecting more of your income, saving more of your money in repayment. And then finally, the last thing that's going to be implemented next summer is that it offers a shortened timeline to cancellation for folks. So if you have a lower balance on your student loans and you've been in repayment for a long time, you might be eligible to get your debt canceled this July. The scale is a little bit tricky, but it's essentially, if you borrowed $12,000 initially or less than that, you can receive full cancellation after 10 years of repayment. And then it goes up on a sliding scale. So if you borrowed less than $13,000 and you've been in repayment for 11 years, you're eligible for it, and so on. And so, it might be worthwhile if you think that you have one of these lower balances or initially borrowed less than $12,000, or you've been in repayment a long time. Might be worth looking up to see what your original balance was, to find out if you might be one of those folks that could get your debt canceled in July of 2024. Okay. So next, we've just got some loans that are eligible for the SAVE plan. I want to mention here that Parent Plus loans are not eligible for the SAVE plan, but in a little bit, we can talk about a way that maybe folks with Parent Plus loans can get on the SAVE plan. And then if you were already enrolled in the repay plan before the pandemic, you'll be automatically placed into the SAVE plan. For everybody else, you can sign up at studentaid.gov/IDR or contact your servicer. And then one final note about kind of return to repayment and how this interacts with income-driven repayment. President Biden announced an on-ramp period that will last until September 30th of 2024. This means that if you miss any of your payments during this time, you won't be considered delinquent. You're not going to be sent to a credit bureau. You won't be placed in default, or you won't be sent to any debt collection agencies. What will happen is the interest will continue to accrue on those loans. And if you're seeking something like PSLF, those missed payments won't count towards PSLF, but it does give people a little bit of wiggle room during the next year if you're having trouble making payments. And so I mentioned this kind of in this swath of slides because You know, maybe if you are, if you know that your original balance was less than $12,000 and you've been in repayment for 10 years, and you know that you're eligible to get your debt canceled under the SAVE plan, maybe it makes sense for some borrowers to, you know, not pay during this time because they won't have some of the negative ramifications that would have been in effect otherwise, and get your debt canceled in July. So I'm happy to answer more questions about that at the end of the presentation, but I wanted to mention that here too. Okay, so next we're going to talk about the IDR account adjustment. So we've already talked about income-driven repayment plans and how they work. You're supposed to get your debt canceled after 20 or 25 years in repayment. However, last year, a couple government reports came out, and you know, a couple different reports came out saying that you know, folks haven't been receiving this cancellation after 20 or 25 years in repayment. That out of a potential universe of about 4 million people, only 200 people have ever received cancellation under these plans. And servicers have been routinely steering folks into forbearances and deferments instead of offering them income-driven repayment plans that would have been more affordable for them. So to rectify this, the Department of Education announced something called the IDR account adjustment, where they're going to go through everyone's account, do a one-time audit of all of them. And they're going to count different periods of time that otherwise wouldn't count towards IDR repayment. So they'll count some time in forbearance, they'll count some time in deferment prior to the year 2013. And so this is a way to get, you know, more credit towards cancellation under the income-driven repayment plans. And one nice thing is that all this counts towards PSLF if you're seeking public service loan forgiveness. So any of that credit that you accrue also applies to public service loan forgiveness. It's mostly automatic. For most folks, it will be automatic, but for folks with commercial FFEL, which are federal family education loans, that's an outdated loan program that predates 2010. And those commercial FFEL loans are ones that are held by a private lender. We'll talk about this in a moment. But for folks with any loans that basically aren't held directly by the Department of Education, they need to consolidate before December 31st in order to participate in the IDR account adjustment. So you might be thinking, how do I know if I have these commercial FFEL or Perkins loans to figure out if I need to consolidate so that I can access this? The first step is really going to studentaid.gov and going to your dashboard. That'll be the best place to go. You can also download your aid data, which will give you a more granular text file of your loan history. So that's another option, but the easiest way to tell is from your dashboard, which looks like this. So here you can see that this person has 2 direct consolidation loans. So that means that they already consolidated at some point and they have direct loans because it says direct next to them. But they had these other loans previously. So they had Graduate Plus loans, Perkins loans, and then some subsidized and unsubsidized loans. Those loans all have a $0 balance, so you don't need to worry about those. But you will be looking at, you know, what loans have a balance and what's the name of them. And, you know, to figure out, you know, if you need to consolidate, you're looking for words like FFEL or Perkins to think about that. And then you can see that these are direct. So let's go to the next slide. So once you get to your dashboard, you'll be able to tell if they're held by the Department of Education or not. You can see in this second block here that Wells Fargo Bank is the private lender. So that's an example of a private lender. And then the last block says Department of Education / MOHELA, and you know that that is owned by the Department of Education. Another really easy way to tell is if you've been receiving the payment pause for the past 3.5 years. That means that you haven't been required to make payments on your loans, but you know you have FFEL loans. Then you have ones that are held by the Department of Education. And if you have been required to make payments on your loans during this time, then you have one of those commercial FFEL loans, and you'll need to consolidate them if you want to access the IDR account adjustment. Okay, so let's just recap how you might want to the steps that you need to take if you want to participate in the IDR account adjustment. So first, go to studentaid.gov, figure out what type of loans you have. If you don't have loans that are currently held by the Department of Education, they need to be consolidated before December 31st of 2023. The Department of Education has already started adjusting accounts of those that have been in repayment the longest. And so if they've already crossed those thresholds of 20 or 25 years, this summer, President Biden announced that, over 800,000 people had their debt canceled to the tune of like $39 billion. And a few weeks ago, it came out that another additional $9 billion was canceled through this IDR account adjustment. So really exciting stuff to see this happening in real time. all other borrowers' accounts, so if you haven't crossed that threshold of 20 or 25 years, everybody else will see their accounts adjusted sometime next year in 2024. That's not a finite date, but it'll happen sometime next year to account for that consolidation deadline of December 31st of this year. Okay, so next we're going to talk a little bit about public service loan forgiveness, what this program is, and how it interacts with the IDR account adjustment right now in this moment in time. So public service loan forgiveness is a government program that was created in 2007 to help public service workers who are struggling with their student loan debt, and also, so that borrowers wouldn't be deterred from entering the public service because of their student loan balances. To put it simply, PSLF is the promise that if a borrower works in public service for 10 years and makes payments on their loans during that time, they can see the remainder of their balance forgiven after 10 years. So this is how the program works. Typically, there are 4 requirements. First, you have to have the right type of loan, which is a direct loan. Again, those loans have been the main types of loans, federal loans, since 2010. So if you took out a loan since then, it's likely already a direct loan. If you have one of those older loans that I was talking about, like a FFEL or a Perkins loan, you can consolidate your loans to make them direct and eligible for the public service loan forgiveness program. The second requirement is that you have to be in the right type of repayment plan, which for most people, one of the best plans will be an income-driven repayment plan. You can also be on the standard plan, but remember that the standard plan has you paying off the entire balance of your loan after 10 years. And so likely your payment will be more affordable under income-driven repayment plans. Third, you need to be in the right type of employment, which is public service employment. That means that you have to work for a 501c3 nonprofit, any level of government, which includes federal, state, local, or tribal governments, or certain other nonprofits. And what usually falls into that category is something like emergency services. Maybe you're not falling directly under a county or a city government, and you're not a 501c3 nonprofit, but you are doing work for the public good. And so that's something that's usually included in that, like certain other nonprofits space. Finally, and you have to work full-time, which is defined as 30 hours a week. Finally, you have to make the right number of payments, which is 120 payments or 10 years worth of payments on while meeting all the other requirements. So you have to make 120 payments on a direct loan while enrolled in an income-driven repayment plan, while working full-time for the public service. So those are the requirements generally. Some really good news is that any months that you've been receiving the payment pause for the past 3.5 years count towards the 120 payments that you need to make for public service loan forgiveness, even though we haven't been required to make payments. You still need to meet all the other criteria, and the most important criteria is that you've been working for a public service like entity for the past 3.5 years, or for however many amount of time you have and been paying your student loans. Right now, the PSLF program is interacting with this IDR account adjustment. Basically what it's doing is it's waiving these first 2 requirements. So if you previously didn't have a direct loan and you previously weren't on an income-driven repayment plan, now is a great time to rectify those 2 things to get back on track for PSLF with fewer penalties than would normally exist. So previously, if you didn't have a direct loan and you consolidated to make your loan direct, you lost any credit that you had gained towards PSLF, because when you consolidate, you're essentially taking out a new loan and paying off the old loan. But right now, in this moment of time, if you consolidate, you're able to keep that past credit on your loan and apply it to the new direct loan. What that looks like is that if you have a FFEL or a Perkins loan, you need to consolidate if you're looking to get PSLF credit through the IDR account adjustment. And then if you haven't already filed a public service loan forgiveness form, it's a good time to do that. So a reminder here is that you must consolidate before December 31st of this year. That's the deadline for consolidation to keep the maximum amount of credit on your loan. And then the next action item is to file a PSLF form. That can happen at any time. That doesn't have to happen before the 31st of December. But we recommend that folks submit PSLF forms every year that you're employed by a public service employer, and then every time you change jobs to make sure that you're on track. there had been a lot of historical issues with the PSLF program. And so by submitting every year and every time you change jobs, it's a great way to make sure that you can catch any mistakes that are made and deal with them in real time. Okay, so then here we have a note on Parent Plus borrowers, and I'll talk about a couple other things related to Parent Plus borrowers. But Parent Plus borrowers are eligible for the Public Service Loan Forgiveness program. They were excluded by something called the PSLF waiver. They also aren't eligible for all the income-driven repayment plans that I mentioned. But so, you know, they're historically left out of a lot of things, and advocates have been working really hard to get them included in things. And so at the end of last year, the Department of Education announced that Parent Plus borrowers can accrue that retroactive credit towards PSLF through this IDR account adjustment. The action items are a little bit different. You know, if you're a Parent Plus borrower, you could submit PSLF forms for any past public service employment since October 1st of 2007. You could also consider consolidating to get on an income-driven repayment plan if you haven't already reached 10 years in public service. I mentioned consider consolidating because you're going to want to weigh your options. It might be more affordable for you to remain on the standard plan, or it might be more affordable for you to get on an income-driven repayment plan. When a Parent Plus borrower consolidates, the only plan that they are eligible for is the Income Contingent Repayment Plan, or the ICR plan, and that is the least generous of the plans. And so, you know, checking out that loan simulator tool to figure out what the best option for you is a good idea for folks who are Parent Plus borrowers. Another thing I want to mention is that if you are a Parent Plus borrower and you're interested in the SAVE plan and you want to get on it, there is another way to get on the SAVE plan for Parent Plus borrowers. It's a little bit complicated. The process is called double consolidation. We actually just put out a blog today on double consolidation for folks, and there's a great resource from the Massachusetts Attorney General's office on how to do this. But it is complicated, and you have to be precise about it. And so if you're interested in that, I'm happy to share that resource in the chat at the end. Yes, so those are kind of some general things for Parent Plus borrowers to consider at this moment in time. And I'm happy to answer more questions at the end too about this. I know this is very complicated. Okay, so next, remember that the deadline to act, the deadline by which you need to consolidate is December 31st of this year. And then just to review how to get some PSLF credit through the IDR account adjustment. So first, check what type of loans you have at studentaid.gov. If you don't have direct loans, you'll need to consolidate before December 31st in order to get all the credit, all the maximum credit on your loans transferred to the new consolidation loan. If you have Parent Plus loans, consider consolidating to get on an income-driven repayment plan, but weigh your option between the standard plan or income-driven repayment plan, the ICR plan. And then submit all your PSLF forms for all eligible public service work that you've had since October 1st of 2007. That's when the program was created. So any public service work that predates that date won't be eligible, but any time after that will be eligible. And you'll have as many forms that you need to get your employer to sign that you've had employers. And so if you worked at 5 different places that were public service employers since 2007 and you're looking to get credit for all that time, you'll need to have 5 forms filled out and signed by your employers and then sent to MOHELA, the exclusive servicer for the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. Okay, so let's move on to Fresh Start. This is a program for folks who are in default. You are placed into default if you haven't made payments on your student loans for 9 months. And there are about 7 million people in default currently that were in default prior to the pandemic and were saved from some of the negative effects of default during the pandemic. And so a Fresh Start is really meant to be an easier way out of default. Typically, if you're in default, you could either consolidate or you could rehabilitate to get out of default. When you rehabilitate, it takes about 10 months. It's a pretty onerous process. The Department of Education is monitoring your payments to make sure that you can make those payments. And so Fresh Start is really meant to be a quicker, easier way out of default. What it does is it immediately restores your repayment options. So it gives you access to all those IDR plans. It also immediately restores your ability to go back to school and get aid to go back to school. If you rehabilitated during the pandemic, you're able to have that rehabilitation option restored. It also restores your credit, and then it protects you from involuntary collections if you've been in default. These are the eligible defaulted loans. You must have defaulted prior to March 13th of 2020 when the payment pause began. So any loan that defaults, after this on-ramp period that I mentioned, won't be eligible for Fresh Start. And then these are the eligible loans that are available to get Fresh Start. This is a smaller slice of the pie, but these are the ineligible defaulted loans for Fresh Start. And then, like many of these other things, this isn't completely automatic. There are some action items that borrowers need to take. So basically, borrowers have 1 year after the payment pause ends. So you basically have until next August 30th to either request to get on a repayment plan or request aid from a school to go back to school. So for the first option, you need to communicate with the default resolution group or your guarantee agency to request to be put on a repayment plan, or request aid from an eligible school. If you choose the latter option, the school will need to get a signed statement from you just saying that you agree to have your loans transferred to a non-default servicer. If you don't do one of these action items before next August 30th, you will be placed back into default using the original date of delinquency. All right. Finally, one last bucket of information here. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the Supreme Court decision that came down this summer and some debt relief updates. So as I'm sure you remember, President Biden announced a plan that would have provided up to $20,000 in relief for anyone who used a Pell Grant to pay, for any of their education, and $10,000 in relief for all other federal borrowers. This application was open at the end of 2022 for about 6 weeks, and during that time, 26 million people submitted applications. That really speaks to the popularity and the necessity of a plan like this. And 16 million people were already in the queue waiting for their debt to be canceled once they were, the plan was able to be enacted. As I'm sure you know, a federal judge in Texas and a panel of judges in Missouri blocked this in court, went to the Supreme Court. We had a big rally outside of the Supreme Court in February. And in late June, the Supreme Court struck down this debt relief plan under the HEROES Act. So what you need to know right now is that the president is pursuing another route for debt cancellation under the Higher Education Act. This method is having to go through a process called negotiated rulemaking that is happening right now. There are 2 more sessions this year that are happening, and basically a committee of people from borrowers to industry folks, from advocates, are on this committee, talking about and deciding what the parameters of this program might look like. So while we're waiting those guidelines, it's a great time to be thinking about other options for cancellation, getting on track now that repayment has begun. And so there's a lot to think about right now. But the main takeaway from this piece of slides is that, President Biden is trying to make this happen. We've been monitoring the negotiated rulemaking process quite diligently. And so, we're hopeful that broad-based debt relief will be an option for folks at some point soon. All right, so let's go to important takeaways and then we can get to some of your questions. I know this is a ton of information. Okay, so first, go to studentaid.gov. That's really your main takeaway. Figure out what type of loans you have, because that'll affect your eligibility for different programs. You know that if you don't have direct loans and you're seeking PSLF, you need to consolidate before the end of the year. Or to get the maximum credit on your student loans, or if you have those commercial FFEL loans or Perkins loans that I was mentioning before, and you want to participate in the IDR account adjustment, that you'll need to consolidate before that December 31st deadline. You'll also be able to see what your monthly payment will be on studentaid.gov. If you are seeking PSLF, fill out your PSLF forms and send them into MOHELA. If you're in default and you want to participate in Fresh Start, make sure that you request to be put on a repayment plan or request aid from an eligible school to get back on track. Finally, 2 last things. As you can tell from this presentation, there's a lot going on right now, and there will be a lot of people looking to take advantage of any miscommunication that happens, or just so much that's moving. So please beware of scams. If someone is calling you, telling you that if you paid an amount right now that you could get the rest of your debt canceled, that is likely a scam. That's a red flag. So make sure that you're getting your information from a trusted source like studentaid.gov, We also have an amazing resource called cancelmystudentdebt.org that has a lot of how-to guides on how to do this stuff if you feel like you need more support. And then finally, file complaints if you experience any issues. These are so important. You can file a complaint with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. You can file a complaint with the Federal Student Aid Ombudsman within the Department of Education. And then some states have ombuds persons at the state level. We keep a list of those on cancelmystudentdebt.org. Complaints are super important in shaping the policy of the future. Also, the more complaints that a given agency receives about an issue, the more likely they are to respond to that issue. And so please file complaints if you are experiencing issues. Okay, so I think that's it. Thanks for your attention. Let's get to some Q&A, and I'll welcome Kat here to help us out.
Amy, thanks so much. That was incredible and so much wonderful information. Right now we have 2 questions, and just a reminder, please feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A. We'll start with these 2, but if people have questions as we go along, feel free to drop them. One question that's already been answered, but worth saying another reminder, we will share a recording of the webinar along with the slides and some additional resources, for example, like Cancel My Student Debt and links to the ombuds people that Amy just mentioned. So please look out for that email after the webinar, likely Monday. All right, Amy, first 2 questions are on PSLF. And the first question, someone's wondering if they should be on both SAVE and PSLF. If they qualify for PSLF, can you talk a little bit about being on IDR plans?
Yeah, I'm gonna actually go back to a slide to help us out. Okay, yes, so income-driven repayment plans and the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, there are different things, but they work together. And so from this slide, the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, there are 4 requirements, and being on an income-driven repayment plan is one of those requirements. You can also be on the standard plan, but that will likely be not as affordable as one of the IDR plans for you. And so yes, you can do both at the same time because they are separate, but they work together. And so if you're interested in PSLF, take the steps in this presentation to kind of make sure that you're on track. And one of those steps could be, getting on an income-driven repayment plan. And so you can be on the SAVE plan and in the PSLF program too. And in many cases that will probably be the most affordable plan, so that'll save you more money and get your debt canceled after 10 years of working in the public service. And so this is a great question. We get this a lot, and that's, thank you for asking it.
Thanks
and
so
Kat,
much.
please feel free to add anything if I miss anything.
No, that was great. And then also with PSLF, can people who are AmeriCorps members, can they apply for PSLF?
Yes, they can. And AmeriCorps time counts towards PSLF. And so you absolutely can. You're working for a nonprofit. Kat, I'm not sure if you have any advice for AmeriCorps members that are submitting PSLF forms.
That's a really great note. And so yes, so like Amy said, generally if you're working in AmeriCorps, you're working for, again, a qualifying employer, 501c3 nonprofit, or possibly working for a local, federal, or state government. So again, another form of a qualifying employer. And you made a really good point about making sure that your employer certifies your form, because understandably, you're in an AmeriCorps program, but it's really important to note that you're also that your employer signs the form. So oftentimes you might be in an AmeriCorps program, but your employer might be a school district. They might be a local nonprofit. So your employer that qualifies you for public service will be the one who would fill out your PSLF form. So really great note, Amy. Thank you.
Thanks.
For sure. And then we have a question about for people who already have direct loans, do they have to consolidate? And if they don't, are there any benefits to them potentially consolidating their loans?
This is a great question. Okay, so if you already have direct loans, there might be some benefits to consolidating, particularly before December 31st because of this IDR account adjustment. One of the benefits of consolidating direct loans, so basically all these cancellation programs are on the timeline that your loan is on. So say you took out undergraduate loans in 2010 and then you took out graduate loans in 2015. Those loans are on two separate timelines for cancellation, either under public service loan forgiveness or under the IDR plans. And so consolidating those two direct loans puts them on the same timeline, and they'll put them on the timeline of your oldest loan. And so that is one of the benefits to consolidating direct loans. You know, direct loans are already eligible for public service loan forgiveness. They're already eligible for cancellation under the IDR plans, but consolidating them together would make them on the same timeline of the oldest loan. And so that is a great question. Yeah, thank you for asking that.
Thanks, Amy. And then another question, just clarifying for PSLF, if someone's seeking PSLF, is it 10 years in public service after the loan was issued, or a 10-year total of working in public service in order to meet that requirement?
Yeah, this is a great question. So it is 10 years after the loan is issued. So if you have public service work from before you went to school, from before you took out loans, that won't count towards PSLF. But anytime after the loan was issued will count. And anytime after the loan was issued, after October 1st of 2007, to be very precise, that is when you can start accruing PSLF time, unfortunately.
Thanks so much, Amy. And then we have one question in regards to Fresh Start, so I'll just answer this one really quickly. So you do have a question, someone saying, you know, they think they should be over that 20-year, 25-year threshold for IDR, but there was a period of time when those loans were in default. Unfortunately, periods of default do not count for the income-driven repayment account adjustment. I know, very, very frustrating, but even if, for example, there are payments being made to a default servicer or through other forms of garnishment, those periods of repayment unfortunately don't count towards IDR. And that's, again, one of the reasons why with Fresh Start, the importance of getting student loan borrowers back in good standing who are previously in default, because once those loans are back in good standing, they can then start accruing credit for these programs. But unfortunately, those periods of default don't count for those programs. So I know it's not the best of news, and it's definitely frustrating, but just wanted to flag that one.
And just a note, sorry, just to add to that
You know,
note,
thank you.
I'm seeing like kind of a related question about being unemployed and not able to pay anything, and also getting out of default and getting back on track with Fresh Start. So if, you know, for these income-driven repayment plans, you have to recertify your income every year. However, if you have an event that happens, you know, maybe you lose your job, or you know, something drastic happens, you're able to get your payment recalculated, you know, if you've lost your job or something. And so if you're unemployed, you know, you could get your payment recalculated so that it's, you know, a $0 monthly payment, but you're still in repayment status, which is really helpful, especially for folks that are just getting out of default and trying to accrue time through these IDR plans. And so that is like another thing to consider as well.
Thanks so much, Amy. That was such an important note to add. Someone has a question about consolidation and seeing two different amounts for their subsidized and unsubsidized loans. Do they need to consolidate? They're asking, you know, whether or not it needs to be consolidated again to get them into one amount. That, Amy, I don't know if you have an answer. I'm not quite sure by the question. If I have an answer for that, but I don't know if you do, Amy, but
I think if you look here, I think that, you know, you just need to make your loans direct essentially. And so if you look here, this person has direct unsubsidized and direct subsidized. So I think that it's very likely that they're like essentially two different buckets. I don't know that there's a way out of that, Kat.
yeah, I don't either, but thank you for showing that slide, Amy. That's actually a really helpful visual. Thank you. One thing that might be, oh, sorry, what were you going to say?
No,
Amy?
go ahead.
One thing that might be helpful, and it might be a little bit easier depending on who your servicer is. Like, so for example, if MOHELA is your servicer and you're seeking public service loan forgiveness, the more important thing you'll want to see is, are those loans on the same timeline for cancellation? So when you go to your servicer website, it may show them separately, like Amy has just shown here. But when you look and see their timeline to cancellation, that's the important note to see if they're on that same timeline. But I don't quite know the question about consolidating again. Amy, I don't know if you had anything else to add.
Just like, I think that makes, that's a great way to go about that. I think like another thing to think about is just like, if you're seeking PSLF, your loans need to be direct. It doesn't matter if they're unsubsidized or subsidized. You're just looking for the word direct next to your loan type to make sure that they're eligible. But Kat's point about checking your servicer site to see the timeline is really important as well. But just want to clarify that direct loans are eligible for PSLF.
Thanks, Amy. And then one question we have about someone's PSLF application being denied, can they still get cancellation this year before the 31st? I think that might be through a question about the IDR account adjustment. That means it depends. And Amy, definitely chime in if I miss anything here. There are several reasons why someone can have their PSLF application denied. It might be because they've yet to reach that 120 payment threshold. So for example, if the payment account is not at 120 qualifying payments, that just might be an issue with time. It could also be if a person has older loans, they might have FFEL or Perkins loans that have to be consolidated. To do so, yes, those would need to be consolidated before December 31st of this year in order to get the full credit of payments before consolidation. Maybe someone previously didn't submit. Again, this could also be a payment account issue. They may not have submitted all the paperwork for all their employers. So it's hard to say it's hard to say what steps the person would need to take without knowing the reasons for the denial. But theoretically, if someone can correct the errors, whether it was having the wrong type of loan, whether it was, getting the additional credits that they needed, you could still reapply to get credit for PSLF, but it really just depends on the reason. Amy, I don't know if you had other things to add.
Yeah, I think so as Kat mentioned, there are a number of reasons a person could get denied. Some of them are legitimate, like Kat mentioned, maybe you need to consolidate, maybe your employer didn't fill out the form right. But also maybe you got improperly denied. And in that case, you could file a complaint with the Federal Student Aid Ombudsperson. You could also, they are rolling out a reconsideration process, but I'm not sure that that's fully rolled out yet. And so you could reapply, once you get new forms filled out. So, if you were denied and you believe you were improperly denied, I would just make sure that you checked all the boxes in this presentation, made sure your loans were direct, that you were on the right repayment plan, your employer didn't miss any things that they had to sign. And so if it's, the latter box of like, maybe you were improperly denied, I would file a complaint and then maybe reapply. There was one more thing I wanted to mention that I can't remember right now, but it'll come back to me. So those are some good things to consider.
Thanks so much, especially on the reconsideration piece, Amy. Thank you so much for flagging that. We have a question about someone who's been making additional payments on their loans. Can you talk a little bit about how that counts, or does it count for purposes of IDR in terms of getting closer to that cancellation timeline?
Yeah, so if you okay. So unfortunately it's like one payment per month. And so you're not able to make like multiple payments in a month and have them counted for the purposes of IDR or PSLF. So yeah, unfortunately it's like 120 payments or 10 years of payments. You're not able to kind of get months to double count or payments to double count within a month. Kat, if you have any other thoughts on that.
That was great, Amy. No, thank you so much for adding.
I guess I have one more thought on this question I think that you're referencing. So this person is saying that they're making extended payments. So if you're in the extended repayment plan, that is not an income driven repayment plan. And so let's just make sure we show the slide. Okay. Oh, geez. So here's the extended repayment plan. This is not an income driven repayment plan. So this plan has you paying off the entire balance of the loan for a longer period of time. It is not eligible for cancellation after 20 or 25 years. And so, you know, it definitely wouldn't count under IDR if you are in fact on this extended repayment plan. So just flagging that these things are different. So this extended repayment plan does not fall within income-driven repayment.
Thank you so much, Amy. Such a great catch. Really appreciate that. And then we have another question. And again, just one more reminder. We have right now one last question, but if others have questions, please feel free to drop them in before we get to this last question. But someone had a question about, what happens to, these different relief programs or public service loan forgiveness under a different, after election or a different administration. The one thing we'll say is that we can't speculate on the future or, the nature of what's going to happen. But what we do talk about is the programs as they exist and how long and how they have existed. For example, public service loan forgiveness has existed for, since 2007. So this is a program that has lasted through multiple administrations, different parties. And so this is a program that exists, but we can't really speak to, what happens to the cancellation plan, what happens to the income-driven repayment account adjustment. We can't speak to those things in terms of like what would be the state of, different student loan programs and different administrations. But what we will make a note, and I think one thing that's really important that Amy flagged during this presentation is that many of these programs are time limited. So for example, the income-driven repayment account adjustment, if you need to take steps, please do so before December 31st. Like Amy mentioned on Fresh Start, you have until the end of August of next year. So making sure, especially for the programs that are time limited, those actually only last for a brief period of time. So taking those steps while you can. But again, we can't really speak to the nature of what programs will look like in the future. But Amy, if you have anything to add, please feel free to do so.
No, I think that was great. I think like the only thing I would add was that, the public service loan forgiveness program was created by Congress, and it was like a bipartisan legislation. So, I think that is very hopeful for its existence for years to come. But yeah, we can't predict the future, unfortunately. So yeah, but thanks, Kat. That's very helpful.
All right, we'll do one more last call for questions, but Amy, again, thank you so much for all of this really incredible, helpful information and really breaking down these questions. Again, another note that we'll be sending out a recording in addition to other resources that Amy mentioned on this call after the webinar. But Amy, please feel free to add anything else. But thank you everyone for joining.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining, everyone. Thanks to Kat for helping with questions. Please look out for our email on Monday that will have a recording and some other resources. Yeah, I hope you all have a great weekend, and thanks again for coming tonight. All right, take care, everyone.